really good advice could be things like making sure you choose a high protein and or high fiber like plate of food to start with. Welcome back to the Smart Strength Training Podcast. We are on podcast episode 37. And for today's question, I'm actually taking a request. I was asked very nicely if I would cover this topic on an episode, and I thought it was a really great topic. So let's crack on with it. And that topic is how to negotiate restaurant food, eating out when you're dieting, when you're trying to lose body fat. Recognizing that if you're trying to go through a period of sustained lower energy intake for the goal of intentional weight loss, we need on average for our energy intake to be lowered, and restaurant food is arguably, definitely, going to be some of the most energy dense foods that we come across. If you think back to 2022, when the UK government made it mandatory for restaurants over a certain size to put calories on menus. Now, I don't necessarily want to go into the topic of that because I know that can be quite a controversial one because, of course, it was put in place to help with the obesity crisis. I think we can all agree that that hasn't really worked because obesity is, of course, far more complex than just how many calories people eat in restaurants. So regardless of your stance on whether or not calories should be on menus, I think we can all agree that at some point we've glanced at a particular dish on the menu and thought, wow, there's a lot more energy in there than I thought there would be. And that might be in, say, the risotto or the burger, for example. So we can recognize that restaurant food does pose a challenge when it comes to energy. So first of all, I just want to talk about a bit of strategy, and actually, this is just going over some of the ground that I went over on a recent podcast episode, which is just to make sure that you're smart around when you intend to try and lose body fat. Working on the basis that you're going to be probably at best losing a pound of body fat per week, based on the fact you might lose a bit more at the start and then it plateaus out a little bit. So if you're working on the basis you're going to be losing a pound of body fat per week, you can work forward from there and say, right, how many weeks do I think this diet is going to last me? It might be 12 weeks, it might be longer. And then just be mindful of when you layer that period of time over. I use myself, for example, like a lot of my friends, loved ones, like the most significant people in my life, their birthdays cluster for me around May and June. So for me, if I wanted to try and lose body fat, there's no way I could try and do that over May and June. I wouldn't be successful. I would be setting myself up for failure. I would at least need to alter my expectation around how successful that would be. The next is to think about how often you eat out anyway. If you're the sort of person that actually only really eats out once every 2, 3, or 4 weeks, then of course it's not going to be that impactful for you, one meal every now and then. You can still use the rest of the podcast episode for some guidance. But for those that eat out twice a week, 3 times a week, this starts to become a lot more important. And in that situation, I think a bit of strategy and maybe just being a little bit selfish can go a long way. So, for example, if you're eating out twice in a week and that's with your work colleagues, then at the weekend you're seeing your mum and dad, well, maybe in the week you just want to have the lighter options. Don't drink because it's just work colleagues. And then it gives you more flexibility to really enjoy the situation or the occasion with your mum and dad at the weekend. So you can be flexible or you can be selfish around what you do to be a bit more flexible in some meals and a little bit more dialed in on other meals. Of course, you can do the kind of classic thing around planning what you're going to do. A lot of restaurants will have the menus online so you can look in advance. That can be very useful. Of course, it's very popular these days for restaurants to do more sharing plates. And if you're in a group that people share food, then it's going to be a little bit harder to guarantee that what you order is actually what you're going to eat. But planning can go a decent way towards being successful. Certainly so can just understand that some cuisines are a little bit easier to manage energy than others. So certain cuisines are based around more creamy, higher fat, very tasty, maybe more deep fried foods, maybe like French, Italian, American foods. So potentially those style restaurants might be a little bit harder to stick to, whereas things like some Asian food, Japanese food can be a little bit easier. But being aware that sort of westernized versions of these, like Chinese food, for example, can be a little bit trickier. But certainly if you had a little bit of scope to guide the choice in restaurant, then it certainly some restaurants are going to be just naturally easier than others. So a piece of advice I often hear people say is like, right, bank your calories. So when you get to the restaurant, you get to eat more food. And that can be okay, like creating a calorie buffer in the weeks. When you get to the weekend, you've just got a bit more flexibility. But what you don't want to do is rock up starving or effectively like crush your energy intake through the week. So you, by the time you get to the weekend, you're just like, you have no willpower because you're absolutely ravenous. I don't mind the advice around sort of lowering caloric intake in the week a little bit to give you a little bit more wiggle room at the weekend, and maybe having a slightly lighter day leading up to that meal. But be mindful about turning up to any meal very, very hungry. And if you are noticing that you'll go back to leave the house and you are hungry, then trying to have something like a protein-based snack before you go out, like some Greek yogurt or something, just so you take the edge off your hunger. So by the time you get to the restaurant, you've got a much better chance of making sort of smart choices overall. So let's talk about those smart choices. What can that really mean when you actually get into the restaurant? Now, you do want to try and manage hunger and satiety overall. So really good advice could be things like making sure you choose a high protein and or high fiber like plate of food to start with. So this might be things like sashimi, steak tartare, kind of leaner meats or salads, just so you're going to have the kind of macronutrient and kind of nutrient that is going to help with hunger overall. But of course, you have to have chosen those things when you're ordering food. So when we're thinking about ordering food and we're looking at a menu, we really want to place our focus into the most energy dense elements of what we're about to consume. Because often people might say, look, Andy, I'm going to be really good. I'm not going to have the bread basket. Well, bread isn't massively energy dense and it's quite enjoyable for a lot of people. So potentially by restricting that, you're actually not going to affect energy to the magnitude that you were really after, unless, of course, you lathered that bread with butter. So the recognition or the realization that fat has 9 calories per gram, carbohydrates and protein 4 calories per gram. So fat is more than twice as energy dense as carbohydrates and protein. And of course, restaurants can combine those flavors of fat, sugar, and salt to be really, really tasty. But thinking about the kinds of foods that are just going to hold a lot of energy, this is going to be things like creamy sauces, food cooked in butter and oil, fried foods like onion rings, cheese. There's going to be lots and lots of energy in there. And if we go back to the example, because if you're just ever thinking about calories on menus, you go back to the example of a burger with fries and onion rings. You might look at that and go, wow, that's 2,200 calories. That's loads of energy. Burgers, they're a really bad move for me. I'm not going to have them. But actually, the burger, it by itself, probably was only about 500 calories. And the rest of those calories would have come from the deep fried onion rings, the deep fried potatoes, the crisp, and potentially the sauce that's then with that. So you can make smart choices, or certainly you could make adjustments to what you're ordering to lower energy, just appreciating that things like fat are very high in total energy. And go back to the butter or the bread, for example, cutting the bread out wouldn't really do an awful lot unless it did alter the fact that you would add a lot of butter to it. But if you really like the bread, then having the bread, but just recognizing that you don't want to have the butter, like often it comes to, if you're in a posh restaurant, they love to bring it to you from the fridge for some reason, I always find. And then you end up consuming way more than you actually want. So just being mindful of those sorts of things. And little things like if you're ordering vegetables, you might get like the creamed spinach, or you might get like asparagus that's been covered in butter. Or if you get a salad, you're going to end up with a lot of dressing all over it. So just making those sorts of adjustments to the order can be really, really useful. I think don't be afraid to ask for things that you want. Don't be afraid to not order off menu, but like say, can you have the dressing on the side, or can you have the veggies steamed, or can it be lighter? Because obviously if someone really enjoys like very buttery asparagus, then you can go for it if you really love it that much. But if you're trying to order a side of greens to increase fiber intake whilst on a diet phase, not thinking about the fact that it's about to come to the table covered in oil and butter, it's not going to do what you want it to do. So just being able to just sort of ask for what you want can be very, very useful in these situations. And we're not about like being perfect. We're not trying to be like on the diet, so therefore I can't have this. We just want to make really smart swaps, so therefore we can enjoy that experience, but still affect the energy intake to the sort of magnitude that we're after. And I played this game quite recently with a client. It was really good fun. She was going to Gaucho in London, the steak restaurant. So we were on a coaching call together. She mentioned it, and I know Gaucho has their calories on the menu. So we went through like the steaks, we went through the sauces and the sides, and just looked at the sort of like the swing in energy. So looking at the rump steak versus the fillet steak, and there was a massive difference in the amount of energy in a rump steak to fillet steak. And then we went down to the sauces, and the béarnaise sauce is really like buttery and awesome. It had somewhere around like 300 calories, whereas the peppercorn sauce had somewhere like 90 calories. So able to order a slightly leaner cut of meat, to have to swap the sauce, then going to the sides. I kind of touched this already. The sweet potato fries were triple cooked, which meant they were energy bombs. Not because sweet potato is, but if you parboil it, cool it, and then put it in a deep fat fryer and then bake it, you're going to have a lot of fat effectively that's absorbed into it versus the skinny fries that had way less energy overall. And the same then was true of like creamed spinach versus just asparagus, I think it was, or broccoli. So going to the restaurant, ordering an awesome fillet with the peppercorn sauce, the skinny fries, and the veggies, whereas she could have had the rump steak with the béarnaise sauce, the sweet potato fries with the creamed spinach. And the difference in calories was wild. Somewhere around like 1,200 calories we got her meal into versus over 2,000 calories for the other. So that can go a long way, because you can go have awesome food, not even think about it, glass of wine. Maybe that one day's energy was slightly higher than the deficit target that she wanted, but overall negotiated an awesome restaurant and a really like relaxed environment, just by applying a little bit of understanding of energy overall, rather than just saying, well, I can't have this, I can't have that, I can't eat this because I'm on a diet. Because that education around nutrition can be very, very useful. And it's one of those things I always really enjoy with my clients, is going through that process and just getting clients a little bit more kind of comfortable and a bit more relaxed about eating out. We haven't got to be eating clean and always going for the salad when we're in a restaurant. We actually can order some really awesome food and just accept that there's some small changes we can make, or understand there are some small changes that we can make to affect the energy density of the food that we're after. But I think it's also really important to state that restaurants are there to be enjoyed. Like, no one goes to a restaurant and thinks, wow, I absolutely love that restaurant because I was able to eat exactly what I wanted and I crushed my diet and it was awesome. Or at least I hope people don't think that. There is a sweet spot to be found. Like, I'd always want someone to feel that they enjoyed the situation, but also that they weren't too restricted in their approach overall. And again, it goes back to the frequency. If people are eating out quite a lot, then they're going to need to be thinking about it a little bit. But if you're eating out a lot and you're trying to lose body fat, then have you really chosen the right time of the year to be doing that? So yeah, finding that sweet spot where people are able to sort of like just be relaxed in the situation they're in a restaurant. But I do really think that education around food and being able to negotiate a menu is really powerful, and it takes away a lot of the sort of like worry about staying on track with nutrition when you're on your diet. So I hope that was useful and you can put some of that into practice yourself. I really enjoy going through these sort of like requests, let's say, for podcast episodes. If you have any requests of your own you'd like me to cover, then do let me know and I'll make sure I cover it off soon.